Welcome. Feel free to go ahead and type your questions in the chat. I think we're still a couple minutes early. Feel free to go ahead and leave those questions now. I can also start reading a couple from email. There was also one from earlier today. Actually, I'm going to go ahead and do this first. We had ran a little bit over time in the first session today. So someone had left in the chat box, I wonder if these kinds of people, narcissists, etc., can cause the ones around them to experience fatigue. I remember I was suffering from horrible fatigue when I was living home where my narcissistic father is. And every time I go home for a visit, which is only about once a year, I feel a lot of fatigue, and it is hard for me to even focus and think clearly. I still suffer from fatigue sometimes, though, even though I live far away from him. And why is that? I notice my sister has the same problem, and I think it might be the same with one of my brothers. So yeah, that is a very, very common symptom, the exhaustion, and the physical exhaustion that can happen, especially because usually when you're around these people, it's like constant circular conversations. Like you're just trying so hard for them to see the truth or realize whatever is going on, trying to fix things, taking responsibility for things, and even just the thinking part. Even when they're not there, and even after you left, when you're still in that obsession phase, which is very characteristic of the particular kind of PTSD or CPTSD that's caused by narcissistic abuse, and just running your mind constantly around it is utterly exhausting. It's just utterly exhausting. And it's this desperate attempt to understand what's going on, or to try to thrive in the moment and figure things out and work things out, and the natural human impulse in relationships is to talk about things, to work things out. And when you're in a relationship with one of these manipulative types, you don't get to work things out. It doesn't happen, because they're always right, you're always wrong, or it's someone else's fault, and they don't admit what they're doing. And they'll go all around these long conversations, and after all this time, maybe you'll finally think you're getting to some point of progress, and at the very end, they drop it all. They say something that just cancels it all, and it's just, it's over, it's gone. And all of that for nothing, and then all the things that you're trying to do to be good enough, right? Because nothing is ever good enough for them. So you're always efforting, trying to be better. You're walking on eggshells, which in itself is exhausting, because you're not free to be yourself. You're really nervous, and you're spending so much time thinking about exactly how you're going to say something so that they don't interpret it in a certain way. Or yeah, it is utterly exhausting. I had the same experience when I would go home. I would just be exhausted. I thought it was the water there. I know the water is pretty poisoned there, but I think it's much more the emotional environment, and what happens in psychological abuse is literally, it will just exhaust your energy. I think someone else might have something. Yeah, someone else added to, it's the worry. We spend so much time worrying how to make it work, and that's utterly exhausting, because when you're worrying, you're thinking a lot. In Chinese medicine, worry, they call it rumination, and rumination is the same word they use for the stomach, digesting things. And worry is a way of churning over and over, like a cow eats its food and just chews and chews and chews and chews the food. And so you're intaking, we were talking in the first session about different kinds of food, right? The physical food and the energetic food, the mental energy, the emotions, all of that you're digesting. So when you're worrying, you're just going over and over and over again, utterly exhausting. That's one of the major symptoms of people who are either in the abuse or just recently out, and they're still in that phase where they're just trying to understand. They're just going over and over and over again in their mind, what I could have done better, what did I do wrong? Where did it go wrong? Did he or she really mean that? All of that. And yeah, how do you tell a toxic person from the initial conversations when you're talking with them and you feel exhausted having a conversation? Have you ever going out for a drink or a meal or just talking to someone in the street, and like you develop like the sudden narcolepsy, like your eyes are closing, like you can barely keep yourself awake and you weren't tired a minute ago, but it's just like they're sucking all the energy out. They call that energy vampire, right? And so when you're hanging out with somebody and you feel like that, or you feel like you have to exhaust yourself to keep up with them in the conversation, like, the kind of narcissist that's always like, looking for your reaction. Like they say something and they want you to go, uh-huh, yeah, huh. And like, they want you to constantly be engaged in giving them a reaction. They're always like pausing and waiting for this. And so like, you feel like you're trapped in this. I used to get sucked in these conversations. Not anymore. Now I just keep it flat. I don't use that energy. I can feel myself when that energy is starting to come out of me. And I'm like, whoa, I don't want to do that. But they'll have this way of sucking out your energy. So when you start to feel that exhaustion in new people, that's when you know it's not a good situation. Something's not right. Somehow that's going to get toxic for you. If you hang out with that person too long, spend too many conversations talking to them, you're going to feel really exhausted. Yeah. So another person says, exactly. I thought about it so much because I just couldn't understand why he was doing the things he did. Yeah. So many people will question this. Someone else adds in here, my situation is like yours with your parents, but my father is the narc, also my uncle. I often worry so much for my mother. She's exhausted and claims she can handle him, but I see her suffering. I was wondering, how do you deal with this with your father? Also, is this possible to actually get over them? Okay, can you clarify what you mean by the last part, to get over them? Do you mean like to get over the hurt of the relationship with the parents? Can you just clarify that? And I'm going to start with the first part. So what do you do about the codependent parent is what I think this question is asking, the initial part of the question, right? Like there's the narcissist parent, whether it's mother or the father, and then there's usually the codependent parent. Like sometimes, there could be two narcissistic parents, but in the case of the codependent and the narcissist, in this case, she's talking about how her mother, is exhausted and claims she can handle him, but she sees her suffering. I watched my dad get like nitpicked down all the time, and like the digs and whatnot. And if I'm just there for a few days, I don't observe too much of it. Though it's pretty obvious, but the longer I spend there, the much more real it is. And I listen to him, and his response is usually, okay, honey, sure, honey. And it almost makes me want to throw up, because I'm like, why are you giving in like that? And then I remember, it's just a lot easier to give in, to give them what they want, to respond in the tone, okay, honey, and then everything's okay until the next demand, and it's very sad to see that that's where he's at now, and I know other family members who are in similar situations as my dad, and their children trying to wake up the parent, but at this point, like he's like pretty hopelessly dependent, and probably your mom is in a similar situation where like she can't imagine her life without him. As messed up as it is, it's even more scary for her probably to start over, to be alone, to not define herself based on that relationship. And I've come to understand that my dad's probably never, ever, ever going to leave. Whether or not he changes the dynamic within the relationship by setting new boundaries, I don't know. I don't know if that's what he's going to want to do, because it's going to make things more uncomfortable. And, I don't know that that's his goal. I think he sort of resigned himself, to this point of, I don't know, being able to manage it like that, which is really just, it's a self-sacrificing kind of thing, and I imagine it beats down on him, because nitpicking just beats down on you when someone's always doing that, and they're always controlling what you're doing, and like, why are you doing that? And how are you, and they're always on top of you like that. But I don't see him ever getting out of it. And in your case with your mom, it might be the same thing. And like, there's nothing you can say really to get them to that point. It's a similar situation when you see a good friend of yours or a sibling getting screwed over by some kind of abusive partner, or maybe at their work situation or something, and you're like trying to wake them up, and you're like, you don't have to do this. You don't have to play this role. You don't have to put up with it. That's abuse. And maybe they even agree it's abuse, but maybe they just can't get to that point where they want to do something about it, and everybody gets to that point, when they want to. And some people never get there, like ever get there. And that's just the path that they choose. So I've let go of all control over that. And I've let go of my hopes, like I want him to be happy. I want him to find his joy. I think he finds his joy in some ways, like smoking cigars and that sort of thing that he does for himself, and so I support those activities, but I also recognize that I can't do anything about that. Now that we've had the conversation and it's out in the open, he's full well aware of how I see the situation. We even talked about Stockholm syndrome, and, I referenced, an ex of mine. And I said, imagine an ex of mine is saying the same thing that she's saying. You would definitely not believe that. And he said, well, that's because I know your mother. And I said, that's the whole problem. Like, you're in that Stockholm syndrome. Like, you don't see it. And unless he wants to get out, he's not going to get out. All you can do in that situation, you and anyone else who's in that situation, is to work on yourself and to heal yourself and just shine that light, and the light will shine on her. And, maybe she'll see that light and she'll want to experience that for herself, or maybe not. And it's totally out of your control, and one of the pitfalls of codependency is wanting to heal other people, wanting to fix other people, seeing people suffering and trying to take that on for yourself to help them. But you really can't do that. You really can't help them in that way. It's only going to bring you down. And really, it's a form of control. It's one aspect of control that the codependent, will overcompensate on, because everything else is out of control, in an abusive situation. So they try to help and fix somebody else, or they try to help and fix the abuser, and it's like the one sense of control that they have in the relationship. But unfortunately, it's also toxic, because it'll end up, being heavy on you. It'll affect you, and you can't change somebody who doesn't want anything to change, and it's really sad to get to that understanding. And I think that was part of this crazy cold respiratory thing that I went through over the last 10 days, was I was finally processing the end of that grief, like burying the hope and letting that go, and releasing all control that I had over that, or of anything else changing, and just fully recognizing that the only thing I have power over, the only thing I can change, is myself. And that's all you can do, and just shine that light. And, the people who see that light, who want to be part of that light and, have something like that light, they're going to see that. They're going to wake up. It's going to spark something in them. Maybe siblings or cousins or, extended family or friends of yours who are going through this. But it might just be that for your mom, it's not this lifetime. Okay, so she followed up. She said, because you said you didn't go no contact with your mother because you wanted to keep the relationship with your father. It's the same with me. I want to keep a relationship with my mother, but every time it's a reminder of how narcissistic my father is. Yeah, that's the thing, that is the thing. I mean, and if it got to the point where she was flat out attacking me, it got really bad, then I would have to cut it off with her. And then I would have to see where my dad falls in that. And I would only assume that he would be on her side because he's hopelessly dependent on her, and even if he sees the truth, at some level, and that's the thing, where you're trying to maintain the relationship with one, and you still have to deal with the abuse of the other in order to be around that other person, or at least, the total unpleasantness of the situation. And it's rough. It's hard to do, but like I said too, like if it ever gets to that point where you have to make that decision, like, does it ever get to that point where it's so toxic that you have to cut off? It could be, I fully accept that could happen. Like after a month after talking to her, it could be 6 months down the road, she decides to attack me or something. And maybe like the work, like she's had all this time to plot something. Maybe if that's what happens, like I'm fully prepared to go no contact. Right now, I am trying to maintain that relationship, like you're saying, with the other parent, especially. So she said, I had heard it about the rumination. It's incredible how draining it can be. If I hadn't experienced it and someone told me, I wouldn't believe it. Yes, I mean how to stop seeing myself in the world through the narc's eyes all the time. Right. So this is the negativity paradigm. When you grow up in a narcissistic family, it's like imprinted on you. When you're in a relationship with a narcissist, it gets imprinted on you, during that time as well. It's like a different kind of imprint, but the commonality is the negativity. And it's like everything is negative. Like even my internal dialogue, like I would think back to where I was and I was like, oh my God, it was just all negative. Like all I saw, everything was negative, 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 because you're living in this negative paradigm. Nothing's good enough. Nothing's right. This is all wrong. Somebody else is wrong. Like, it's always something negative. And, you start feeling bad about yourself. You start having this negative outlook on the world. And it feels like there's like this black plague all around you. It feels like you can't accomplish things like you used to. Like how many people do I talk to who tell me like, I used to be this like, successful, driven, I had all this stuff going for me, confident person. And then I went into this relationship and I fell apart and like, I don't even know who I am right now. Like I lost my job, I have this health problem. I got this and I got all this stuff on me now that's keeping me back from living my life and living my dream, or even working and being able to afford for my life, and that's where it gets you. Like that is the power of that kind of negativity. Like it will suck the life out of you. It will suck the soul out of you. And how to get that back is to get back to you, rediscover who you are. And that is the benefit of spending some valuable alone time after the abuse, where you're just focusing on you and what you love and who you are and what's not right inside there. What are these emotional things that are coming up, and processing that, and what are the deeper wounds behind all that, and what does this remind me of from childhood, and like how can I be there for myself now? Like, you can't change the past. All you can change is your perspective now. So what can you do now? What perspective can you shift now? What action can you take now to change how you feel about yourself? To upgrade your self-love, to upgrade your self-respect, to start using boundaries and recognizing that you have the right to have boundaries, to start expressing your needs and wants and not have guilt around that, to be able to ask for what you need. And in doing this in various different ways, like it doesn't have to be in a relationship. It can be as simple as like the woman earlier talking about going to the grocery store and asking for what she wants. Like that too, it's all related, and then upgrading your self-esteem, upgrading your self-worth, like you probably got into all these like negative thoughts about yourself, like, oh, I'm not attractive enough, or I'm not intelligent enough, or I don't make enough money, or I don't dress well enough, or my hair isn't long enough, or, whatever the thing is, it's something wasn't enough for that person or all the people, right? The narcissist. And so you end up like, you realize like the way you feel about yourself isn't even normal. Like it's not how it was. And so you got to get in there and dig out those things and start to reframe that, and reframe like what you really value. Get to know your values again. That's one of the Sana series. I think it was like week 5 or 6 was on defining and aligning your values and vision. Like you really want to redefine your values after you get out of one of these relationships, if you've grown up in one of these families as well, because your values are so distorted. Like you've probably taken on the values of the narcissist, and that's very confusing. and it's confusing to your integrity. It's probably why you acted out of integrity, because of the pressure, and also because of these superimposed values, because your integrity are your values in alignment with your actions. When your values and your actions are in alignment, you're in integrity. But when you're taking action that goes against your actual core values, you're no longer in integrity with yourself. And so, really important to get in there and discover what those core values are. Like what's really important to you? What's really important to you? What do you love? What do you really value? And then also looking at yourself, for the self-worth and what do you value. But your self-worth is also very connected to this idea of what you value in the world and how well you are acting in alignment with that, how well you are in integrity with those values. Because when you act out of integrity, your self-worth goes down. Every time you did something that the narcissist pressured you into doing that you didn't want to do, and somehow you acted against your belief systems, or you accepted something that you weren't okay with, like maybe polyamory, like maybe you really wanted monogamy, but and they pretended like it was a monogamous thing, and it was intense like the first month or however long that went, and you're like, this is awesome and it's exclusive, but it wasn't really said. And then like a month goes in or 2 months go in, and now you're in deep, and now this person's like, oh, I don't want anything exclusive, I want to see other people. And you're like, what? But then now you're in so deep that you end up compromising that, and you end up staying, right? And then so your self-value goes down, right? Every time you make a decision like that. So rebuilding the self-worth is about being real clear on what your values are, and then taking action in alignment with them. And so the value starts to come up, the self-worth starts to come up. The self-esteem comes from your interaction, your engagement with reality. So when you're acting in reality and you're getting positive feedback from the world, your self-esteem is higher. When you're getting negative feedback, your self-esteem is lower. And so, when you start to get to that point where you feel like helpless, like nothing you do is affecting anything, and it's just all this negative crap coming out you're at a point of disempowerment. Either you're not owning the responsibility of your actions, or you're in this relationship and you've been taking actions against yourself, and you've become so deflated in your image of who you are, that in your self-identity, that you go out into the world and you don't feel like yourself, and you feel so crappy about things, the constant arguing, the constant second guessing and self-doubting and all this, and you go out into the world and it's like people and everything is responding to you at that vibe, because that's what's being projected out there. So get really clear that you are a co-creator in your reality, that you have power to shape your interactions with reality, with the world around you. Like, because when you're with the narcissist, you feel like you're totally out of control. You feel like they're in control of everything. You got to take that power back. You got to take that control back. And it really starts with that no contact thing. Again, there are extenuating circumstances, like people who have children with the narcissist, or in these kinds of cases like we were talking about, where there's a narcissistic parent and we want to maintain relationship with the other parent especially, and so we have to maintain gray rock communication, have very, very clear boundaries and enforce those. That's that first step of either going no contact or going real clear boundaries and minimum contact. Those boundaries and the way you mitigate that communication and contact is going to help you start lifting your self-esteem, because the less of your energy is going to be leaked out, the less of that negativity is going to be getting in when your boundaries are healthy. When your boundaries aren't healthy, it's all getting in. It's all being absorbed. It's become part of you. You no longer differentiate what's yours, what's mine. It's all, you've taken responsibility for it all, and all the responsibility was put on you, because it was always your fault. They were never wrong. They were never responsible. So this really adds up. So really it's a lot of work, working through all these things, but you can work through all these layers. It's just that there are all these layers going on: the self-worth, the self-esteem, the self-image, the self-love, the self-trust, all of these being at the core work of redefining your reality paradigm. And then that changes everything, but the very first step with coming out of these situations is the boundaries, the contact, the boundaries. Once that starts, you start getting your energy back. Because like when you have no energy, which is the case of exhaustion, the first question, and the case of, just trying to like start your life over, not seeing your life in the world through their eyes or yourself through their eyes, there's like a lack of energy. There's like almost like this, you have like no drive to get up and do anything. And so the boundaries is what allows you to start maintaining your energy. Like, you'll be shocked how much more energy you have as soon as those boundaries get clear. And if you still don't have that energy, it's because somewhere in your life, those boundaries still aren't clear. With some kind of toxic person, those boundaries aren't clear, or you're going out into the world and the boundaries aren't clear, and you're open to everything coming at you. In some way, the boundary thing isn't set. So when the boundaries are set, then you start to have all this energy. And with all that energy, now you really feel like you can start doing this work. You can start applying and directing that energy to certain tasks and certain activities that you want to do. Okay, someone says, in regards to the family dynamics, especially spouses, it could be parents or whomever, but it's so hard to watch from the outside when I already know what is happening. I don't know what to do. I want to say something, but I know it's not my place. Yeah, I mean, it's helpful, I think, to speak your truth. I think for me, that was incredibly liberating, and so many things changed in my life, like inside of me, around me. So much started changing when I started speaking my truth. Speak your truth, but then, still not try to control the other person, because all you can do is share your light and share your truth. And maybe the other person wakes up in that reflection. Maybe they never do. And yeah, it's really hard to watch it happening when you know it's happening, but really got to get to that point where you accept you have no control over that. Yeah, so that other person said, it's sad and the other parent deserves better. It's very sad. It is sad, but remember, they're also choosing that. They're still choosing that. You can't choose that for them. No matter how sad that is for you to watch, they're still choosing that. They're an adult. They're getting something out of it if they're choosing that. Someone says, narcs are such hypocrites because they nitpick everyone, but they fail to even look at their own flaws. It makes me so angry, but I know angry won't do anything but fuel the fire more. Yeah. You want to try to stay away from the anger toward them, from like reacting in the anger, because then you just give them what they want, trying not to react at all. Someone says, my godfather, who I try to keep in touch with, is a fantastic person to hang out with, but not to be close to. He pretty much told me he was a narc years ago. He has a wonderful girlfriend that I love and respect, but he treats her so terribly. He stepped all over her at the last family get-together. I feel like I need to say something, but I feel like it's pointless. Yeah. I mean, it's a little harder too when she's not the blood relative. I don't know. I would feel a little bit more scared to approach that. And if you want to approach it, it might be easier, instead of confronting her, about her situation. I find it's usually really helpful and disarming to share some piece of my own vulnerability, and then somebody, whoever I'm talking to, often like that's the point that they relate on. It's not me pointing out their situation because they don't want to see their situation, right? But me pointing out my situation or a past situation, and like expressing that vulnerability and how I overcame it, right? And that sometimes is enough to spark someone, or at least spark someone to share something. I found many times that people, shared an abusive situation of the past or present after I did that. But yeah, it could be really hard to get in there and confront her if she doesn't want to see that. That could also put you into some kind of danger, with the uncle. Someone said, oh, you're so right about the integrity. That was inspiring. You're welcome. The integrity, right? Because like that's where you lose the self-worth, is when you make decisions that are out of alignment with your integrity. And you got to own those decisions, because even though you were pressured into it, and it was like everything depended on you making that decision, or that relationship, wasn't going to survive. So you made that decision, but even so, you made the decision, right? And so owning that decision so that you can release the regret about it, and so that you can start lifting your self-worth again. Someone asked privately, when you spoke your truth, did you sometimes get backlash? Definitely, because the people living a lie don't want to hear your truth. The first time this happened in the family was years ago, when I finally admitted that my grandfather, my mom's father, had sexually abused me as a child. And there were some family members who were pissed. I wrote a book, and like I had written the first version of the book years ago and put it out online. And I was just like trembling with guilt and anxiety before I hit the button to like load it up. And I knew it was coming. It was that whole crabs in the pot cooking scenario that I mentioned in the first session today. And I feared that. And sure enough, like there were a few family members who like just like attacked me for things that I said. And I also was still at a point of anger, like I described my grandfather and at least one of his siblings that we know of who were pedophiles, like at least two of them, and this person was really upset that I was talking about, the great generation like that. And that's a bunch of bullshit. You do not have to swallow that because somebody else doesn't want you to speak your truth. Like you have every right to speak your truth if you want to speak that and share that publicly or with people in your family. Like you have every right to do that. And, the people who are living in that illusion, living in that lie, they're the ones who are going to react the most vehemently against that. Like I can guarantee, even though these people have never confided in me, I can guarantee that the ones who reacted so loudly were probably the same ones who were also abused and in total denial, unable to admit it or recognize it, because why would they be that angry that I was sharing my truth? Doesn't make sense. Like a healthy person, would see that and would be angry for you and want to hug you and tell you they're so sorry that happened and that you didn't deserve it. And, something of this nature, that would be the healthy response. But so you can always tell, by the way people react to your truth. And, I didn't always do a good job of it because back in the day, like I still had a lot of anger about it and I probably didn't approach it, in really healthy ways, just blurting something out like that. I probably could have used a lot more tact, but, I was also coming from this place of like hurt and pain and like nobody wanted to hear my truth because everybody just wanted to like eulogize him, because he was like an exemplary figure in society and in the family. And it's like, well, yeah, there was all that, but all of that doesn't make this okay. Like this happened and I'm allowed to express that and I'm allowed to express how I feel about that, but thankfully now I'm at a different point in my healing where I don't approach it in such a brash way, I guess, is what I did before. Now I just speak my truth plainly. And yeah, there's definitely still backlash that will come, expect that when you, especially in the family dynamics, when you share your truth, there will be backlash. It's going to happen. And that's just part of you standing up and owning your truth, and it will be worth it. Like in the short term, it's going to be a lot more uncomfortable, but in the long term, it's going to change everything, like everything. Someone says, I know how it feels when you get your energy back after you got out of a relationship with a narc, because I successfully got out of 3 toxic relationships. It's just hard when the narcs are in your family. Yeah, it's really hard, and that's where those boundaries come in. Like if you're still going to have the relationship, you want the relationship with the one parent, so you have to manage the relationship with the other parent because they're still together. That means if you're still feeling really low energy, you still need to upgrade the boundaries. Like there's still some way, is it something that you're sharing that you shouldn't be sharing? Like that was one of the boundaries that I realized I was compromising myself. I learned never ever to share my hopes and dreams for the future again. Like if I share that stuff, it was going to crush me. It was going to crush my sense of faith. I was going to start to get into deep self-doubt and all of that. And so that was when I said, okay, that's off the table now. No longer talking about that stuff. And it's really hard because it's your family. You want to share, like the big things in your life, but it's not safe. And so, it's really about figuring out like what is it that you can talk about and share about, and then what things do you absolutely need to keep private. And I would keep everything emotional private. everything, your happiness, your sadness, anything that happens to you that's really emotional in any sort of way. Like, I would totally keep that private and do not share that information with the narcissist. Talk about the weather, talk about sports, talk about current events. You know, you can even get a little bit emotional, you know, about politics or something, as long as you don't take that seriously and as long as you're not attached to that personally, right? You can talk about your dog, you know, something like this, or just, you know, trip to the grocery store and what you cooked for dinner and stuff like that. Just keep it there. And you're having like small talk and, you know, that sort of thing, you know, but you're not letting them in anywhere deeper. And so imagine there's like layers of your being now, right? And so your close friends, your close, you know, support network, they get in here. They get to be in this part because they deserve that. They've earned that trust. They reciprocally share with you. You mutually uplift one another and love one another, right? So you can share real deep, vulnerable stuff with them. You can be real with them. You can't be real like that with a narcissist parent. You have to have these boundaries, and you can only let them into like this outer sliver, you know, of your life, because anything else will end up just bleeding through. That toxicity will get in. So I would encourage you to take another look at your boundaries and see where you could be a little bit more careful, especially in the things that you're sharing with the narcissist parent. Someone writes privately, hey Meredith, I'm just wondering what it means if the nightmares that I started having after being with the narc have now increased in intensity to the point that I wake up in tears, sobbing uncontrollably. Also, when I was with my ex-narc, he was often causing me extreme sleep deprivation. And I was wondering how common this is to narcs or abusive types. Thank you for advice, and to everyone sharing their experiences. Yeah, this is extremely common, the sleep deprivation. I didn't realize this was a thing until like, you know, 5-6 months ago. I started to see this pattern. I was like, oh wow, that definitely has happened like over and over again. And everybody has their own techniques of this. Maybe they start a fight late in the night, you know, and like they disturb you so deeply that now you can't sleep because all you're thinking about is that, and it's unresolved. And maybe they're giving you the silent treatment and like all you're thinking about is that, you know, and so you can't sleep, or literally they're there poking you, waking you up for sex in the middle of the night. You know, I mean, sex in the middle of the night, it's great if you want it, right? But if it's a person who's like trying to wake you up, and, you know, and it's going to be on the night when you have a 6 a.m. wake up call because you got this important meeting and thing you got to do, that's the night they're going to bother you, or that's the night they're going to start the fight. Or, you know, they're, you know, something about the way they wake up in the morning is going to be really disturbing with their alarm and the slamming of doors and the noise that they're going to make, or the blinding light that they're going to flick on in the room, or, you know, these kinds of things. And there's always some way, and it's often a sabotage right before you have to do something important. And I also hadn't made that connection until I was starting to really see this as a pattern. And it was like, it was always when something important was going on, or you were in some situation where you were like with your back against the wall. Like this happened with my ex-husband when we were traveling to visit my relatives in Italy, and we were staying in their apartment, and he caused this fight like late at night, and I couldn't like get mad, and like we couldn't like yell or have any kind of like real fight about it. And then he gave me the silent treatment and he went to sleep, and then I couldn't sleep like the whole night long. And then I was just like really disturbed and upset. So yeah, this kind of sleep deprivation stuff, this will happen. It will either happen because you can't sleep because of your insomnia and your thinking, or they are literally doing behaviors that are waking you up and disturbing your sleep. And why do you think they do that? Because it exhausts you. When you're sleep deprived, you're delirious. Like I get delirious, you know, if I don't sleep well and I can't function during the day. I certainly don't have the energy to like really think clearly, right? So that's totally to their advantage. Is when you're in that state, then they can really get in deep with the abuse because you have no defenses. You can't think clearly, you know, so they're able to take advantage of a lot of different things when you're exhausted and sleep deprived. You know, the nightmares that you're talking about, someone else just brought this up. Gosh, maybe it was a couple weeks ago. It was either last week or a couple weeks ago. I think maybe it was a couple weeks ago now. They're having a similar issue. Oh, maybe it was last week. In the dread. We were talking about the dread. You know, it could be something to do with that. It could be that you're processing, you know, maybe this was even you last week. I can't remember, processing the emotion, right? Like I mentioned during the daytime, some of us get more of the dread attacks during the daytime, and we're processing while we're consciously awake. And some of us or there are periods of time even where you might be processing more in your sleep, during the REM phase where you're dreaming, and maybe you remember, maybe you don't remember your dreams. In your case, you're having the nightmares, which means you're remembering something about it. That's the processing. That's the emotional processing of things. And I would recommend writing things down, like key images or themes or feelings, like after I had confronted my mom, I had a series of dreams about her. And years ago, I would have dreams about her where like, I hated her so bad. And I was just like, I hate you, in the dream. Or like, she would betray me. Like somebody was coming to kill me. And she was like, come on, hide upstairs. And I would go to hide upstairs and like in her room from this person coming to kill me. And they came to the house and she's like, she's upstairs, and just gave me away. And, just like the sheer terror of that and the betrayal. And now I'm having dreams of like her cutting onions and crying. And I'm like, ooh, so she's not really sorry. She's telling me she's going to change and get help, but I don't think so. And then I had another dream that she did something else, kind of malicious. And I was like, all right, well, I don't know that that's totally just processing. I think that's something going on. So if you're also having the kind of nightmares where you're feeling like it's also trying to tell you about your life situation in some way, even if you're no longer in contact with this person, but your emotional state or your perspective of that person, I would look at that too to see, are there any symbols coming up? I like to go to dreammoods.com to check out some symbols of things, and you'd be surprised how uncanny some of that is. So if you're writing it down, then you're really getting a sense of the things that you're working with, the things that you're working on, the things that you're processing, and unresolved issues that are still coming up. Because if you have a dream about it and you wake up with that feeling, and that feeling is with you all day, it's because you haven't resolved that thing. It wasn't just processing. You still need to consciously direct some energy to that in some way. Oops. It says internet connection unstable. Hopefully everything is okay. Okay, someone's talking about the backlash. I got backlash too, but I felt confident after speaking the truth. It hurt, but I didn't feel like a lie. It'd feel better to stand by myself than to stand by someone who didn't want to believe me. Amen. It's much better to stand by yourself than to stand with someone who's not going to believe you, because that is going to hold you back from the healing, right? It's going to hold you back from healing if you're hanging out with people who don't want to believe you, who are trying to make you wrong, who are trying to get you to shut up, to not talk about it. That's going to be very detrimental to the healing experience. Someone says, it was crushing for me too, because they're just unwilling to listen. They're only able to teach their wrong belief systems and won't learn anything from anyone. Right. Small talk is a bit hard also because they see every interaction with me as a good occasion to teach me some bullshit I don't want to hear. Okay, so when that's happening, what I recommend is to depersonalize that. Right? I know exactly, I think, what you're talking about. I've been in this exact state, at least from what I'm understanding here. And it was because I was too personally engaged in that. And so I had to depersonalize that, everything they were talking about. So this is like the devil's advocate too, right? The person who's always going to take the opposite point of view, or like you're sharing something that's important to you and they're going to pick up the opposite thing and they're just going to go into that and try to like belittle you and make you feel small or insecure or wrong or however about what you're feeling or what you're excited about or whatever. So, even if it is small talk or whatever it is, like any opinion, don't express any opinion that you're really attached to. And everything that they're saying, just keep depersonalizing, keep detaching from that, observing it like a movie, being the witness. That's why meditation is helpful, to kind of like cultivate that witness observer perspective, where first you're observing yourself and your reaction, and you're also observing the other person without being directly involved in the drama. And so what you can control is your reaction. And so when you catch that anger, like I would feel the anger coming up from my gut, and it would like come up, and by the time it's in your head and your throat, it's too late. You're already coming out with it. So I would notice it in my body and I would just breathe into that and through it. And I would just keep breathing. So while the person's talking, I'm just breathing and I'm focusing on my breath, and I'm not getting too deeply involved in their words. And so a big lesson to learn with the familial dynamics is to detach from all that. Attachment with healthy human beings is a healthy thing, having a healthy kind of attachment. But being attached, which is a normal thing to parents, right, in family relationships, but it's not healthy and it's not safe with people like this, because when you're in deep in that attachment, there's too much going back and forth and you lose sense of yourself and your boundaries, and it's too personal. So you have to detach from that, separate yourself from that. When it's coming at you, watch it on a TV screen. What I like to do is watch the emergency weather report. It's like the emergency covert aggression report, minimization, guilt tripping. And so it'll come across the screen, and then it's very depersonalized. It's very sterile. It's very clinical. I'm just watching TV, and it's like the weather reports going across. And, oh yeah, that's minimization. Yep, that's guilt tripping. But it's not tripping my guilt. Because I'm seeing it as guilt tripping, right? It only trips your guilt when you're not seeing that, when you're in it, when you're hooked in it. So don't get so attached, cultivate that. And it takes a little while, because at first it's like it's almost like hyperventilating, because you want to respond to that, and the anger is building. Just breathe, slow down the breath and just breathe through it so that you don't respond, and come up with some really disarming things like, that's interesting, Dad, in your case, right? That's interesting, Dad. And maybe you want to get him to explain himself more, and you'll say something like, why would you say that? I wonder why you would think that, and let him go on his thing. If you really are genuinely curious, just to see where is that coming from? Or maybe you just, they're criticizing you or something you believe in. In that case, I would just say something like, that's interesting. And then if it really gets to the point where they're pushing, their opinion on you, say something like, that's your opinion and you are entitled to have your opinion, and I disagree with you. And just leave it at that. That way you're not caught up in the self-defense, because you'll waste an extraordinary amount of energy on self-defense. That comes from Carlos Castaneda. His books, working with Don Juan told him, that human beings expend the most amount of energy on self-defense. And most of that is in your head, in your mind, defending your belief systems, defending your opinions, defending your stance, defending your actions, defending all that. And when you're in a relationship with a narcissist, you're constantly on the defense until you realize that's a game, that's a trick. And then you pop out of that and you stop defending yourself. It's really hard to do at first, because your ego wants to defend yourself. The ego wants to defend the transgression of the boundaries, or the hurtful things. But once you get to that point where you recognize that it's a lot better to be happy than right, not fighting them on that, not defending yourself, because it's so much energy. You're probably not going to get anywhere. You're just going to get just exhausted and upset. And it's just easier just to be happy and say something like, that's interesting, and just keep working on the depersonalization. So this person's talking about the sleep deprivation. He would wake me up if I fell asleep before he did by screaming at me. And this was common, as was the really big fights before my important life events. Right. So you know exactly what that is. Right before your important things. That's just crazy that he would scream at you in the middle of the night if you slept before him. Someone else said, I recently told my narc uncle, I don't want to be in this conversation anymore. He got mad and then told me why I was mad, but I wasn't. I was defensive. He was mad. I was like, are you talking to me or yourself? Right. So that's the projection, right? The narcissist will project a lot of things. Yeah. And you have every right to say, I don't want to be in this conversation anymore. I don't want to keep talking about this anymore. When it gets to that point, and if he got mad, it's probably because you weren't agreeing with him, or you weren't giving him what he wanted. He was trying to convince you to do this or give him this thing or whatever, or even if it was just your agreement with it. You have every right not to agree. You have every right to end that conversation, and when someone just gets that mad like that, and question why. And you did, you recognize that was his projection. Okay, someone says, I know that situation all too well. The one where the narc starts a huge issue, but you can't confront them or discuss it with them because of the people in close proximity. My narc would always start issues around his family, and he knew very well I couldn't confront him around them, so I just got the silent treatment. Right. Like, I didn't realize that was a thing until like the last 6 months, and then it was like everything made sense, like the marriage, the relationships, family, like everything started making more sense. Someone says, it's hard to shake them for long times. And then, yes, I too have nightmares about my narc mom who did try to break down my door with an axe in the middle of the night. Crazy. Wow. Yeah. And then she says, okay, I'll check out the website and thank you for your help. There are lots of unresolved issues to deal with, and I'm trying to get things right this time without being a perfectionist and setting myself up for failure. Long road ahead, but glad to be on the journey of life again, albeit very different than before. Good, good. Yeah, there will be unresolved issues to deal with, and they will come up layer by layer, you know, and you'll just keep working through. You'll just keep working through it and moving through it, and it gets so much easier, you know, as you get into those outer layers, you know, out of that core where everything is just so devastating. And it's good, you know, you said you're trying to get things right, but you're also trying not to be the perfectionist because, you know, they taught you to be the perfectionist. Nothing was good enough. Maybe you were the golden child and you were just always striving to do the best and, you know, be like super exceeding, you know, the demands or the expectations. And, you know, there was always a backlash when you weren't perfect and when you didn't do something perfect. And so getting over that is another thing that codependents, you know, really have to work on usually, especially with the familial relationships. But I've also heard plenty of people who just got into like an adult relationship. And again, you know, that idea of perfectionism was put onto them and then having to overcome that, you know, and like you mentioned too, like setting yourself up for failure. Yeah, I call that the self-sabotage where like, you know, where you do it to yourself, right? Because like growing up, they did it to you. And then as an adult, you get into relationships and they do it to you. And then like you develop these like unconscious patterns of sabotaging yourself right before you have something important to do. Like for me, this would manifest in the form of like some freak injury or like suddenly my back doesn't work. How? I didn't do anything, you know, like, but psychosomatically, or I would suddenly get sick before something, or like, you know, had something important going on. And this was like my body's way of self-sabotaging my efforts because it was a program. It was like mind control programming. And that's what you got to get to the bottom of, you know, and recognize that you're allowed to be successful. It could also be that you learned as a child with a narcissistic family that you weren't allowed to be successful, that you were, if you were successful, it would be taken from you, or you would be punished for being successful or humiliated in some way. And so you would either hide the success from the parent, or you would like specially sabotage yourself at the last moment so that you didn't reach that layer of success, because either way it was going to be ripped away, you know. And so that's the self-sabotage and setting yourself up for failure, is to go into those old programmings, recognize that's just old mind control programming, and you can remove that because you don't need to keep doing that to yourself. But I'm glad you're on the journey of life again. That's excellent. Someone says, this is so funny. I must tell you, I did once say, I don't agree. The poor thing was so confused. He was like, well, I guess one could disagree. That was shocking to him. That's awesome. That's awesome. It is disarming. It does work, you know, and like you said, it was shocking to him probably because he was used to people arguing. That worked. That's probably one of his favorite ways of getting narcissistic supply, is arguing and coming out right every time, you know, or bending the other person to agree with them. Good job. Okay, someone says, as Meredith knows, after coming out of a narc abusive relationship, I came to realize that my dad is a narc and that my mother, me, and my siblings are all codependent. Now I'm dealing with my brother's narcissistic wife and our narcissistic father, whom I help every day. I revealed my observation to my sister last week about our dad, and now everything here is really extra awkward. She was daddy's little princess, and I was his disappointment. She sees my perspective but disagrees. She can rationalize away any of his nasty and self-absorbed and hurtful behavior. Everyone around me wants to pretend it's all perfect. I'm not sure how long I can stay within my family dynamics. I like the person I am when I'm far away, than the person I seem to be when I'm caught in the drama. Right. And that's the truth. And maybe you just had to go back for that reintegration phase, where you get in there and you speak your truth, which you're doing now, which is awesome, because that is groundbreaking. Speaking your truth for the first time is groundbreaking. It changes everything, even if the only change that you notice at the beginning is inside yourself. And it's possible that you'll only be there for a short period of time and then recognize that you have to be somewhere else to be you, or to be the version of you that you like, that you feel worthy, with self-esteem, with a healthy sense of identity. And, the reality is that it could be at the point where, even though your siblings are not narcissists, and so many people have gone through this too, where the siblings were codependents, but so unhealthy, or so hopelessly dependent on the family dynamics that they didn't want you to speak your truth, that they would rationalize it away. That is the enabling of the abuse. That's what Dr. George Simon talks about. How do you enable these covert aggressive manipulation tactics? Is you accept the excuse, you accept the rationalization. So when you accept that rationalization and that excuse, that's it right there. That's your part in the game. And so when you decide to stop accepting that, things get real uncomfortable at first, right? Because when you accept you learn, we all learned at some point, that to accept the excuse and the rationalization, even to the detriment of your intuition and your self-trust, that meant that the situation was going to calm down, and everybody could get a little sleep and relax, until the next storm came. But what you'll realize real quick is that when you start to recognize the rationalization and excuse making as a form of manipulation, and you start to call it out and or at least not buy it, that's when things get really uncomfortable. And that's when you'll see in what direction things are going to go, and it may be that in the very beginning, it's impossible for siblings and whatnot to see anything else. It might be that you get in there and speak your truth and nobody really wants to hear it, and it makes them uncomfortable, and they're making rationalizations, and you pull the plug at some point and you start your life over far, far away, where you can be healthy and be your own person. And then sometime down the road, it could be that your siblings call you, or one of your siblings calls you and says, that conversation we had like months or years ago, like I finally seen the light. I get it now. I see it now. You tried to tell me and I couldn't see it, and I totally get it now. It could be that you get to that conversation and then you guys can really work through that. It could be that conversation never happens. It could be, in the case of like the person who mentioned, like the codependent parent, right? Trying, they're still together with the narcissist and trying to wake up the codependent, and, really that being a hopeless situation. It could be that it gets to that point where your codependent siblings are just hopeless, that they don't want to change the dynamics. And that could go on long after the narcissistic parent is dead, because these are patterns that are deeply ingrained. It's not just that the person is there. These patterns are deeply ingrained in us. This person followed up, thank God our mother, his ex-wife, took this as an epiphany. That helps a lot, although my sis was my best friend, so that tension is hard to take. It is wonderful that your mother, was able to realize that, and being that she's his ex-wife was probably a lot easier for her to see and accept the situation, because she's not in it and she's not dependent on it anymore. And thank God you have an ally in your family, because it's just so devastating when you're so alone, when you're the only one in your family who's waking up and you just feel so alone. You really doubt it, and you might be tempted just to go back to how things were, because you just feel so alone and crazy, like because no one else wants to realize the situation. But you had the validation of your mom, and that's awesome. Like I had the validation of my brother, and I wouldn't have gotten through if it weren't for that. I really don't see how it would have happened. So that was a blessing that you have, that, you're able to process some of that with your mom, and your mom was able to acknowledge that. And I'm really sorry, that your sister was your best friend, and now the tension is so hard. And this tension will be hopefully a temporary thing. Hopefully she's going to break through in her own understanding. And it's probably going to take to the point of you stepping out, and not filling that role, because as long as you're still in it and fulfilling that role, then everything is still going on. and you might start to rebel more, and so shakes things up a little bit. But if they can keep pulling you back into that role when you're there, then nothing major is going to change. But when you step out of that situation long term, that's when things are going to have to change, because who else is going to play the scapegoat role? Someone will have to fill that role. And it's quite possible that your sister catches on, because, maybe she's the next in line. Like maybe, maybe because your father is the narcissist, maybe there's like a tiny bit of misogyny there. So, maybe he goes to your sister next versus your brother, because your brother's the man, or maybe because your brother is the oldest, he gives him a pass or something. So he starts to transfer that to her. But probably somebody in the immediate family is going to start taking on the scapegoat role. There has to be a scapegoat. And if you step out and you disconnect from that, the burden of that is going to get transferred to someone else. It's so sad when you're in it, and it's not changing fast enough. And, you're seeing these good, loving people in the abuse, and you just want to shake them and wake them up and get them out and like tell them you have the right to be happy. You have the right to have joy. That's the saddest part, I think, but also understanding that they're an adult and they make their own decisions and life choices. Yes, thanks, Meredith. This is likely the hardest spot right after the reveal. She may catch on. For now, she's become extra defensive of him. Yeah. Yeah, that can definitely happen. And, it's the most important thing, though, is to understand that all of that and any of that is entirely out of your control. All you can control is yourself, your reaction, your response to the abuse, how you show up, the way that you speak your truth with them and how you carry yourself, and just shine that light, and be that light. And if they don't see that and it gets really bad and you get to that point where you realize like you have to pull the plug, you have to go somewhere else and live a life somewhere else so that you can be you and be free, then, don't be afraid to make that decision. And I know it's much easier said than done, because the family dynamics are the hardest ones, especially when the family is really close knit, living in the same area, like in the amount of guilt that you feel in the family situations is significantly higher than the kind of guilt that you just feel with a romantic partner that you met and spent some months or years together with. I imagine it might be kind of similar to the kind of guilt that a person would feel when they have to leave a narcissist who's the co-parent of their child. And especially for someone who's very religious. Like I've seen this deep inner conflict with a lot of people who are very religious, meaning that, the contract of marriage was very sacred to them in a religious sense. And the idea of divorce was really devastating to them, as it felt like giving up, and it felt like not just giving up on the marriage and the other person, but somehow, on their religion or on their faith in God or something, and the child, and so I imagine that kind of guilt. I don't know what that is. I'm not a parent, but I imagine the weight of that guilt is probably something similar to the family of origin, and recognizing that you have to speak your truth and or get yourself out of there to safety so that you can be you, and the phrase that I always share with people who have been in and come out of these narcissistic familial relationships and patterns is, I am my own person. I am my own person, because when you have been engulfed, by the parent and you become an extension of them and they wanted you to do what they wanted you to do, and you lost sense of your values and your dreams and your vision and what you wanted and who you are on an everyday basis, like even living in it and being in the situation is really dangerous. Like, maybe you have certain patterns of behavior that you're really compromising there. Like maybe you don't like to eat with the TV on. Maybe you don't even like TV. And not only do they have the TV on 24/7, but they're eating in front of the TV and they're watching the news and eating. So like they're digesting all this fear with the food. And that's just really, really toxic for you. And it's like really hard to set those boundaries when you're living in this situation, these sorts of things. And so you end up losing yourself and compromising yourself sometimes to do things for the other person. So it's really important to focus, on being your own person. Those of you who are coming out of these family patterns, is finding out who you are, giving yourself permission to be who you are, and not waiting for your parents' permission, and not waiting for any, your partner or anyone else's permission to be who you are, to express who you are. and to not feel guilty about that. Let me catch up here. Okay, I think I'm caught up. Okay, new question, private. Random question. Did any of you have a narc who would destroy things in your home or personal space that they knew you liked or cared about? For example, my ex would say he wanted to paint. Oops, sorry, it jumped. He wanted to paint over pictures that I just bought from the store to decorate my room. And he would paint it and destroy the design. Or he would say he wanted to help me fix my tablet, and he took it apart and then picked a fight with me and left it destroyed. This happened with multiple cell phones as well. I don't know, it was so strange, and I haven't heard anyone talk about this online, so I wasn't sure if it was a narc thing or not. Someone else said yes. Gosh, I can't think of any of these experiences myself. My experience is more in the kitchen with food. Like if I was planning on people were coming for dinner, or I had budget, I like to budget the weekly meals and plan the meals because it's hard to get to the grocery store. And so I would plan to go to the store and get these supplies, and then I would ration it out. This is for this meal, and that's for that meal, and that's for that meal. And then I would go to work and come home, and they ate all this stuff that I was counting on working into these meals or something like that. That's the first thing that comes to my mind. Someone else adds in here, my grandmother painted this beautiful match holder. I know it seems stupid, but I had it hanging on the wall and I loved it because it was from our old cabin. He apparently busted it. He knew it had sentimental value, but he just threw it away. I'm sorry. Yeah, he could have tried to glue it together or gave it to me. I would have glued it together. Yeah, does anybody else have these experiences where there was something that was meaningful to you or important to you and the narcissist destroyed it? Someone says, oh, the person who asked the question, those were just examples, but yes, he would destroy, including eating my food that was supposed to be for guests. Anything he knew meant something to me would be ruined. Yeah, I mean, this definitely sounds like a pattern of narcissistic abuse. I don't have, at least nothing is coming to my immediate memory of direct experience with this other than the food thing. If anybody else has something, feel free to add this. Someone says, in my experience, they throw things in an attempt to damage them, especially if they knew I liked them a lot, but only during fights. Interesting. Someone else says, he ruined all my stuff and didn't care. I worked hard to buy the things I had, but he apparently had unlimited money. Yeah, that's really crazy. And about dismantling, your cell phones and tablets. I mean, that's another level of things too, where it sounds like, that's your lifeline connection to other people. And so if he leaves your device unworkable, then how are you going to connect with anybody else? It sounds like part of the isolation of the abuse, and then on the other hand, the destruction of things, it's like violence. Sometimes they talk about how a narcissist won't physically hit their partner, but they'll smash the wall or something like that. And that being a form of intimidation, and the possible escalation of that abuse. It starts with them attacking or hurting something physical, and then something physical that is sentimental to you. And then what's next, right? Is it you? Someone says, not being allowed to be who I am in what I once thought was my own house, since my covert partner moved her overt 33-year-old malignant in. Now I am the black sheep and they triangulate. Before her son came along, when she was gone, I would clean house and listen to music or play piano. Now I find out they both hate music and I'm not allowed. He plays video games all night, sleeps all day, and instead of him cleaning up his act, I am supposed to change for him. She enables him. Right, so you're not allowed to be who you are at home. You're not allowed to play the piano or listen to music. I would get a pair of headphones if I were you, until you can get out of this situation. If I remember the conversation with you, you're the person who's working to get out of this situation, because this isn't a long-term good situation for you. But in the short term, so that you don't totally lose yourself, get a pair of headphones. I don't know if you have a keyboard, you know, and I know it's not the same as a piano. I don't think there's a way of plugging in your piano, but if there's any way that you can plug in a pair of headphones to a keyboard and or listen to your music on headphones and just rock it out as loud as you want, you know, because at least that way you can like isolate yourself in a room or something away from all that other drama, and you can play it as loud as you want and no one's going to complain, you know, until you get to that point where you can get out of the situation. Because, you know, living in a situation where you can't be yourself is not healthy. That's like, it's a real slippery slope. You know, when you start compromising all these things that are important to you, like playing the piano or listening to music, like it might seem trivial on the surface, which is what they're probably using, you know, to get you to rationalize and enable the abuse. But that's a big deal. Like music is really important to some people. Like some people, that's like one of the most important things to them, you know, and like they get a healthy sense of self and self-esteem and well-being and joy out of music, or, you know, just like to listen to music and just the way that it makes them feel and they feel good, you know. And if you can't feel good like that, and maybe the music is like the only thing that gets you out of the funk state, because you get into this funk state when you're with the narcissist. So, you know, the music gets you out of that funk state and now you feel great, you know, because you're listening to the music. But if you can't listen to the music, right, then you're in a catch-22. So, you know, if you can find a way that you can still do those things for yourself without, you know, without somebody just shutting it down, you know, so you can allow yourself that time and that space. Maybe there's a piano you can go play somewhere else. You know, here in Portland, outside the art museum, they have this piano that appears for a couple months in like the nice weather. And like people just, it's like open to the public for certain hours and people just sit down and just play. And they just play music, and then people gather and listen to it. You know, maybe there's some way that you can go use some kind of other piano somewhere outside of that environment, and where you can do what's important to you and what you love and what really lifts you up and lifts your spirits, so that you don't stay stuck down in that negative, you know. Because if you're just like, all right, fine, I'll just wait to listen to music till I get out of here, you know, that could be something that's so important to you that you end up losing more of yourself and losing more of your energy and losing more of your drive and your focus and your self-esteem, you know. So if there's any way that you can find to keep doing that stuff that's good for you, that's healthy for you, that would be a really great idea. Someone writes privately, that's what I thought. I'm so glad I'm not alone. He was all about isolating, and he would literally destroy anything that I cared about, tangible or not. I got to the point where I shut down and started preserving the things about me, like playing the violin that he couldn't take. Headphones saved me, but then he took those and would demand that I not wear them. Not when I had them, it really helped. Wow. That's really sad that he even went to the point of taking those headphones away. That's when you know you're in a really bad situation, right? When the person like escalates it to that point and they're like denying you of listening to headphones, or you're not hurting anybody. You know, like it's one thing if a person is trying to sleep or work and they can't focus because there's like loud music or noise or something. But it's a whole other thing if you're listening on headphones. You're not disturbing anyone. You know, like you said, you got to that point where you started shutting down, and that's the danger. That's where the loss of self comes in, is when we shut down, when we stop doing the things that bring us joy, when we stop doing the things that are important to us, we start shutting down and losing our sense of self. That gets into really dangerous territory. Someone says, also, I met this girl once who looked a lot like a narc. She stole a shirt I had because she knew I liked it and damaged some of my things and never admitted it. She was also copying my every move, my clothes, my hair, everything. She also looked histrionic, always looking for attention, faking illnesses and panic attacks, screaming for no good reason, etc. Yeah, those all sound like narcissistic behaviors. You know, that the single white female thing, you know, where like they're copying everything of yours, like that gets super creepy. And I think you're right. The histrionic, it seems like that's kind of more of the one of the traits of the histrionics. You know, they have to be the center of attention, and if you're getting attention by something about your appearance, and then they start mimicking that, they cut their hair like yours, they dress like you know, copying all these things, essentially it's for them to get attention. Someone says, I live just north of you. Yeah, I'm in the funk. It's hard, hard, hard. Yeah, that funk is what did the other person call it? Shut down, right? The funk is, when you get into the funk, it's when you're shutting down. It's when you're letting go of your sense of self, right? And so to get out of that funk, you got to do what brings you joy. You got to do what you love, what's important to you. So find a way to play music somehow, where either you're not disturbing them or you're just out somewhere else where you can do it openly and freely, and really connect with that part of yourself that music brings joy to, so that you can stay out of that funk. Someone says, I used to teach secondary music and my narc got me fired. I didn't know this until a year after I met him, but it caused me to break down, which was the worst part of the narc's abuse. The narc ages. Right. The dark part when you don't know, right? The dark ages when you don't know what's happening, that this is actually a form of abuse and that it's a common form of abuse and that there are actual patterns of this and that it's happening to millions of people. Until you know that, you're still in the dark ages. And that's when it's just, like you said, it's the worst part because you just don't know. Someone says, I thought she was a narc because she first trying to buy my love, adulating me and all, and then she started to criticize me, my appearance, my relationships. She was clearly happy every time I was sad. The only thing I think is odd is the obsessive copying my every action. Yeah, probably because there was some part of you that she was jealous. She wanted to be more like. You may have even heard her or other narcissists, say this, where like they actually admit that they want to be like you. And so they do sort of these very perverse sort of things where the single white female things, where they're acting like you and copying you and like all that. And that gets super creepy, and like you said, like she'll, idealize one part about you and then criticize, something about you. That's the pattern. Someone says, my narc got pissed at me for listening to a podcast or music before bed. Yeah. Someone else says, some of my most cherished concert DVDs are missing now. That's sad. So this goes along with when someone was talking about destroying your property. Another narcissistic thing is when disappearing your property, right? Like it's gone and they claim to not know anything about it, but it's missing, that sort of thing. That's along the same lines. Someone says privately, he knew the benefit it did me and he wanted me to have zero joy. I was lost. And now I'm climbing back up with a million new scars. Yeah, they will definitely try to kill your joy. That's why they call them killjoys, right? They'll try to kill your joy because they understand at some level that if you have joy, first of all, it probably makes them sick to look at the joy because they don't tap into that. The closest they get to joy is like exhilaration and thrill, which is probably why they love the thrill so much because it's close to joy, but it's not that. And they will try to kill your joy too, because they also know that if you have a healthy sense of joy, you're going to have a healthy sense of self-esteem and self-confidence and self-worth. So if they kill your joy, they kill all of that. And then you never believe you can do any better. You never believe you can get out of the relationship. You never believe anyone else will ever love you. You never believe that you'll be good enough. That sort of mentality. That's what they're trying to cultivate by killing your joy. It says he was pissed that I wasn't available to him. I was super into this podcast and I wanted to finish it, but it wasn't doing anything for him. So I had to stop listening to it and be available for him to yell at me. Yeah. That's the narcissistic center of attention thing. One, it brought you joy and all that, but two, it wasn't about him. It always has to be about them. And then if there's ever anything that you do for yourself, they call that distraction. If your attention isn't 110% focused on them, something comes up that you have to deal with, maybe something important in your life, like a situation in your life, or worse yet. And I've heard these situations, people will tell me that, someone in their family died or someone close to them died. And that is exactly when the narcissist will attack them. And that is when the narcissist is like demanding like all of their attention, you know, like right in this incredibly devastating, important moment to that person. It's when they come in demanding all that attention and then trying to make you feel like their emergency, which is not like a real emergency usually. Their emergency is much bigger than like the death of your loved one, or like a major crisis at work, or some major life situation that you have to deal with and focus like all of your mental energy on. But the fact that they're no longer the center of attention now, you're distracted. You know, that's what they'll tell you, and that's how they'll try to spin that. Shut down the funk is what this person says she calls run and hide mode. Right. Right. Because that's the fleeing, but like the fleeing into the self. Someone adds in here, I've been saying to myself how sad that I am in hell right in the middle of paradise here in the Northwest. Yeah, I mean, you could be anywhere. You could be in the most beautiful, serene place on earth and surrounded by narcissists and not be able to tap into the beauty and the simplicity and the amazingness of the environment where you're at. Because, you know, that relationship, that negative paradigm is just bleeding through everything. Someone says, you're so right, it makes them sick to look at joy. Whenever they witness it, they try to humiliate and shame the person who is showing it, right? Someone says, mine would say that I was divided if he didn't get all the attention all the time. Okay. Yeah, my exes would use the term distracted. Yours uses divided. That's awesome. Yeah. Anything, right? If they're not the center of attention, you're wrong for not making them the center of attention. That is mostly the histrionic thing too. Like their primary thing is about being the center of attention all the time. And if they're not in the center of attention, they will create, you know, they'll create emergencies, they'll create some sort of drama, usually drama. The histrionics are really into the drama. So they'll create some kind of drama to pull you away from some kind of major thing that's going on in your life. When, you know, until that major thing happened, you were always, you know, giving them so much of your attention, and now you have to deal with this thing. So then they create this drama, you know, and try to make you second guess yourself and self-doubt how important that thing is. Like even to the degree of someone having died, you know, like someone really close to you. And that's really sick, because, you know, having that healthy sense of conscience and guilt, like you could end up feeling guilty, you know, that you're not giving them attention. You know, it's like, it's really sick, the mind games that they will play. And I've seen this happen to so many people. Someone says, that's why there was a time when I tried the gray rock thing. I was showing zero emotions in order not to be insulted. And I was insulted for looking depressed. She has major depression, I was told in an aggressive way as an insult. Yeah, that's why you can't show that emotion. You know, don't show, you know, the depression. Don't let them know that. And it's really hard when you're in it, right? Because you're in the depression and you just feel so helpless. But if you can summon, you know, every ounce of self-control that you have, as I mentioned in the earlier session today, and stare down the wolf, stare them in the eyes and don't let them get you to react emotionally, because when they do, they win. You know, when you reveal that. And the sad part is that when you're depressed, what you need are healthy, supportive people around you to help you, you know, like motivate you, inspire you to like get up and out of that, or help you figure out what's going on, or help connect you to some other resources that can help you get up, you know, to help you, right? But when they're kicking you or insulting you when you're down, you know, that's a very toxic thing. And it's sad that you can't express that vulnerability and look for that support in your family, you know, which is like the first place where you should be able to find that. But in the case of narcissistic family patterns, it's not going to happen. And it's just so much better for you to not share that. And practicing that is very difficult, but it'll also help you build boundaries and help you learn how to reveal and not reveal things and share and not share parts of yourself, because having codependency patterns means that, you possibly overshare with people and then get yourself into trouble because you shared the wrong thing with the wrong person, took advantage of that. And so practicing this is really healthy to get, when you get back out there in the real world, meeting new people, and you share a lot more cautiously, and you give them little bites of things and see how that digests, and maybe a little few more bites and see how that digests, rather than just revealing yourself and making yourself extra vulnerable to somebody who could take advantage of that. So it's a delicate walk, learning, and mitigating your own emotional response, the part of you that wants and automatically just wants to share and reveal, and learning how to put a boundary around that and to protect that, and understanding that it doesn't mean you're not owning your truth, that there are some situations where it's just too dangerous to express truths like that, like your vulnerability. It's entirely too dangerous to express that vulnerability to a narcissistic parent. Like, you have to keep that stuff to yourself, and you have to share that only with people who you can really trust to support you and love you, but you're not going to get that from the narcissist parent. Or worse yet, they're going to make you feel like, oh, tell me more. And then you reveal more. And then they really come at you and kick you when you're down. And that's just like the famous thing that they do, is kicking you when you're down. So really got to put a good protection and boundary around your feelings, around your vulnerabilities, around what you're sharing and what you're revealing about yourself. Someone says, I was in Yosemite among so much beauty, and it didn't matter. I was full of anxiety because of the narc, and he was thousands of miles away. Yeah, that's an excellent point too, where they may not even be there, right? But your problems will follow you. Like, it'll be in your mind. Like, just the fact that it's in your mind, can ruin this beautiful place that you're in, even though he's far, far away. I kept thinking, I'm not doing anything to serve him right now, so he's going to move on. Right. Okay, so it sounds like at the time maybe you were afraid that he was going to move on because you weren't doing something for him. Is that what I'm thinking I'm understanding? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's the whole, I could have done more. I should be doing more. Oh God, am I taking some time for myself? Oh, how selfish of me, right? But that's not selfish. Yeah, see, I gave and gave, right. You were giving and giving. And when I was gone, I couldn't give. Therefore, I figured, what good am I? He trained me like this. They train you like that, you know. And then the fear of like him going to someone else to get what you're not giving him when you're not there, and that like ripping you apart. Yeah, I know all these mind games. Probably everybody here has been through these, like especially that one in the romantic situation. Someone says to that person, yeah, I have to go gray rock and try to minimize contact. I risk looking like the mean one, not giving my narc attention. You are all saying what I was writing. Right. It's hard because I'm not used to acting, because I want to be an authentic person, but I guess we have to learn to act like they do. That was the hard part for me too, is like, I like to be real. I like to be authentic with people. Like I like to do this. I feel like it's very cathartic. It's very healing. It's like, it's where people really relate to that, but then there are some people who the traditional rules do not apply. Just like, the traditional rules of human engagement, the traditional rules of communication and relationships do not apply to the narcissistic spectrum, because they will take that stuff and abuse it. If you apply those same rules to them, they will abuse that, knowing that you're playing by the rules and they are not playing by those rules. And it's the same thing with the authenticity. You have to learn to act. It is an act in a way, in front of them. And like what my mom even said, like, so you mean to tell me all of you are just acting and pretending like it's been all right? And at first I realized that was a bait. Like, she wanted me to feel bad that I was acting, and she wanted to equalize herself, for, doing what they do, telling us that we were wrong too because we were acting, but not that she wanted us to speak the truth, but to try to make you feel guilty about that. But yeah, you got to get to that point where, you have the boundary and like you recognize that it's not that you're not you, because behind that boundary, you're still you. And that with your, what Jackson McKenzie calls your constants, right? Like the people that you can count on, that when you're with them, no matter what interaction you have with them, you feel pretty constant. You feel pretty constant during and after those interactions with them. The people that you can be real with, that you can go from this situation here where you have to act, right? And put on this boundary, and not reveal and not share parts of you, that you can then turn around and go over there away from that person. And now you can be the real you with this person, that you can do that, that you have the ability to do that, that it's not that you're just shutting down entirely everything, because it's not safe out there, because it is safe with the right people. And it is beneficial to be able to be real and be authentic with the right people. That can be incredibly healing to have those kinds of conversations and interactions. Someone says, I have a strange question. Can narcs end relationships? Because my best friend's ex totally looks like a narc, and he left her when she disobeyed one of his rules. But I thought they never leave because they want the narcissistic object, and it's the other who leaves. Well, in this case, that's called the discard. Jackson McKenzie, also from Psychopath Free, describes this as the discard. Sometimes the victim, the target, wakes up and realizes what's happening and they leave themselves. But sometimes, and often, what happens is what's called the discard, where the narc uses up whatever they were going to get from, the target, or the target figured out what was going on and put up some new boundaries and wasn't giving, disobeyed one of the rules. And so to spite them, they will cut and run. They will discard, the person because they're not giving them what they want. Sometimes that'll happen too. It can go either way. A lot of people have felt discarded, and that discard will come like night to day. And sometimes it'll happen, particularly with the borderlines, it will happen as soon as you have like this really deep, intimate connection. It will happen in that moment, or moments later, or an hour later, or say that happened at night, the very next morning they're out, and it's like, and that's what leaves the person like in such a state of disarray, because they're like, but we just shared this really intimate time and there was no reason. And then they were gone. Right. But in this case, you're talking about this person disobeyed the rule. This person put a boundary up. This person didn't go along with the abuse. And so the narcissist ran away because they weren't getting what they wanted. So yeah, sometimes they do leave. And then the psychopathic version, the psychopath is the one that likes to drain the resources, and could be financial resources and things like that of a person. And they just get in and they just drain the person down in resources. And then once they've drained the person of the financial resources, the person was left in financial ruin. Then they cut and run to the next victim who has a lot more resources, and they start again draining down the resources. And that person will almost never hoover that original target, because the target has nothing left, unless the target rebuilds like their financial status or something, they have nothing left that they want to exploit. So they've just moved on to another supply. Yeah. Someone else said the acting part is really hard. I don't want to act either. Someone else said they agree with that, the authentic part. Someone adds, mine literally would tell me how he conditioned people and that all people need to be conditioned. I wish I'd know how serious he was when he would say these things in the beginning. Yeah, sometimes they do reveal themselves with the language. They always reveal themselves with the actions. But every now and then, and if you're listening carefully enough, and of course there's always a double entendre, a double meaning, or the plausible deniability in the word choice, right? But they often will tell you little things like this. Or like if you ever meet somebody and they're obsessed with double entendres. I had an ex who said, do you know what a double entendre is? Do you know? And it was like almost like he was trying to be like, he was better than me if I didn't know. I'm like, yeah, I know what it is. But he thought he was really cool because he knew about this. And then he would use this on me. He would use the double entendres on me. And then I caught on. Eventually I realized what he was doing. but it was like he was revealing that. You know, sometimes they don't directly tell you. Maybe they tell you that everybody tells him that he reminds them of the character in American Psycho. He's telling you he's a psychopath, but he's not saying those words. You know, he's beating around it, but he's revealing himself. Someone adds, I was discarded really easily. That was part of what made it so hard. We were so intense and loving, and then it was like I had never meant anything to him. This is why the discard is so devastating to people, you know, because like you said, it feels like you didn't mean anything to them. You feel like a piece of garbage that they threw away, you know, and then afterward, you're just thinking and thinking and thinking about them in the relationship and what went wrong and what you could have done better and what you could have done more, you know, or how you could have believed more, you know, anything, right? You're just on this, right? And someone just asked me today, I can't remember exactly the question he asked, you know, but it was something like, you know, it's really hard. It was really hard for him to accept that she was, you know, sitting pretty and, you know, having moved on and looking at him, you know, maybe being unhappy in his life situation and being without her. And I was like, I'm not so sure that she's thinking about you, you know, because like they look at people and they objectify people. They use them as disposable, recyclable objects. Like, how long did you think about that piece of trash that you threw in the bin this morning? Not too long, because you thought of that as a piece of trash, right? So if they were thinking of you as just some object, some thing, not some human being with actual emotions and feelings and a personality and a life and an identity, like, I don't think that comes into picture with them. You know, I think they're looking from such a self-serving, entitled point of view that they probably don't give that, you know, such the long term, which is how they can just discard and run like that, you know, and just leave you hanging and no closure. No closure. And that's the thing is you don't get closure with narcissists. Like in a normal, healthy relationship, there's going to be a closure. And it's just not going to happen with them. That's why you have to give yourself the closure. And that's one of the hardest parts, you know, after that discard is coming to that peace of mind through your own internal understanding, which becomes the closure of that relationship. Someone says it's mind-boggling. You share a connection, one you've never had before, and poof, they're like, see ya, you pissed me off. Yeah. Yeah, it's like, it's devastating because in normal, healthy relationships, you work things out. Like two people are going to have a misunderstanding now and then. Two people are going to hurt each other's feelings now and then, not intentionally, but it could happen, you know? And, you know, how do you deal with that? You talk about it in a healthy relationship. And then things get worked out like really easily and nobody's hanging on that and nobody's like insisting, you know, and like twisting and spinning or disappearing. Like those are all unhealthy patterns. That's how you know you're in an unhealthy situation. But when something happens, you know, and you talk about it and you work it out and you understand each other, that's a healthy situation. That's a healthy relationship. That's what two healthy human beings do. Is they work things out, but those rules don't apply, you know, to the narcissistic spectrum, to these cluster B personalities. Someone says, yes, in my experience, the narcs correct and contradict you all the time. And statistically, I obviously was right some of the times. So we had a good fight. When they were right, instead all was good. Right. Right. Yeah, they love to correct and contradict and, you know, take the devil's advocate. If they can't get anything else over you, they're going to take the opposite opinion of you and run that into the ground, no matter what they actually believe on the topic, you know, but just to do that to you. Someone else says, yeah, in my case, my covert acts all sweet, etc., while the son has admitted he is into the darkness. He likes evil characters in movies, comics, etc. I think they both actually study how to be evil with books like Dark Side Astrology. Oh, again, it's telling me that my internet connection is unstable. Hopefully that's not a problem. Yeah, the dark side fascination, that's really creepy. You can find this, you know, with things like comic books and movies. Sometimes people are really interested in satanic stuff. You know, maybe they're just obsessed with like the satanic cults, like, the governmental stuff and all that or whatever that's going on. And maybe they talk about that, but then like they're reading stuff like Aleister Crowley, and they're always talking about the dark arts. And it's like, okay, when they're talking about something that much, they're into that. And, when they're talking about that kind of stuff, you can expect that they're doing that kind of stuff. They may not necessarily be telling you that they're doing it, but they're probably doing something like that. When people are that fascinated with the darkness, that's not safe and it's not healthy. Like, yes, there is the dark principle and the light principle. There is the creative and the destructive principle. And both of those principles, it's the yin yang, right? You can't have one without the other. And it keeps life in balance. But there's a difference between like perverting that, and like using that destruction, using that darkness, using that negativity to hurt people. That's not okay. And so, yeah, unfortunately, this person, the son of this person, is bringing probably a lot of darkness. I don't know how open you are to like spiritual things. I lived with a person who was into this stuff once, and weird shit happened, like stuff I couldn't explain, paranormal, supernatural kinds of stuff. And I was really glad when I got away from there, because it really creeped me out. Like I couldn't find explanations for things. And a lot of it, I think I blacked out too, like just because I just didn't want to look at it. It was just too creepy. Like, when you walk into a room and like your hair just stands up, because you like sense the spirit of death in that room. Like, I don't know if any of you have ever been to that point with a narcissist or psychopath. This one was, I believe, a psychopath with some borderline tendencies. And, literally I felt him channel the spirit of death, and I thought he was going to kill me, and everything was standing up on my body, and everything, I can't even like put into words how it felt, but there was something there and present in that room. And that was the night I knew I had to get out. Someone says, I've had the same best friend since I was 5, and we've all pissed each other off a ton, but we don't ever go, okay, bye. Right. Because that's what healthy humans do, is they understand we're not going to agree on everything. We're different people, and there's going to be occasional misunderstandings, or there's going to be an occasional feelings hurt, because somebody wanted to go out with their friends and you're really hoping to stay in and see a movie, or, whatever, some little thing like that. Right. But you get over it, right? You talk about it, you get over it. Maybe you need a little time to get over it, like if it's something bigger, right? But then you work it out and you talk about it, and we don't just like cut off, entirely just because like one little thing happened, or, someone corrected you. If you correct a narcissist on something, that is like another thing that could set them into this like silent treatment, disappearing act, or what they call ghosting. In the dating world, you'll find this real frequently, where like you date someone for a period of time and like they're in like contact with you, and then they just ghost, they disappear, like thin air, they're gone. Like what happened? You don't even know what you did wrong, and then you're there questioning what you did wrong, and you're like obsessed with what did I do wrong, and you're reading all these self-help dating books, like what did I do wrong? Like how much time did I waste looking at that stuff? It wasn't about dating. The problem was I was dating narcissists. I needed to look somewhere else to understand that. Those aren't normal rules of dating. Those aren't normal rules of human interaction. Someone says, we come together and talk about it. I think these are the only people that gave me any type of normal relationship. Thankfully, you have those friends, having that sense of healthy relationship. That's wonderful that you have those people in your life. Someone else says, right, but there is no compromise with them, so one can't work out anything. Exactly. That's why the traditional rules don't apply to them. Because either they're right or there's no discussion, right? Like you can't win. You can't be right. Someone says, she has come home and may just barge in, which she does all the time. So if I disappear, understand, no worries. Be safe. Someone else says, the lack of closure is awful though. It is. That lack of closure is like, wow, it just sends you in this like tailspin in your mind, just like seeking answers. What did I do wrong? What did I do wrong? What's wrong with me? I could have done more, and it's all this like self-blame, and not getting answers. Like so many people just like desperately asking why, it's really hard. And I just tell people, like, just accept the fact that you're not going to get a healthy form of closure from that person, that you have to give it to yourself through your own acceptance, through your own understanding. It's the only way to get there. Someone else says, I don't get why the narcs always need to take the opposite side and they have to be right. It sounds like so much work. Why not smile and agree to disagree? It's a lot easier. That's funny. Yeah, it does seem like a lot of work, but if in their mind, it's more work for them, perhaps, if they don't win and then they're churning. I'm just guessing, I'm speculating. Maybe they're just like churning in their mind about the loss of that argument or the loss of dominating, whatever that is. And maybe that is so much more work for them than dominating the conversation and bullying you and agreeing with them or something. I don't know. I'm just speculating on that. Someone says, I felt discarded by my dad anytime I did anything wrong as a kid. He will literally love me and then not love me. Whenever I did anything wrong with a friend, I would always assume our friendship was over now and would be surprised when they didn't discard me after all. Yeah, I noticed that pattern in myself as well. Maybe some of you have also felt this, where like, if you feel like you disappoint somebody as an adult, like say you grew up with, a narcissistic parent, and like they shut off their love. Their love was conditional. They gave you love when you were compliant and you did what they want and you fulfilled their expectations. And when you didn't, whether it was by accident or whether you rebelled against their idea of who you should be or what you should do, right? And then like they shut off the love, like the faucet went off, the love went off. And then, maybe then the silent treatment started, and that sort of thing. And then so as an adult, in relationships and dating or even friendships, where like you fuck up, you do something on accident maybe, and like what will happen to me is like the panic and dread attack will come. Like I'll be in the dread attack, like, oh my God, I ruined it because I didn't do this. Or I said, I told him the wrong street. I'm 1 block away. Oh my God, it's over. Oh my God, I'm never going to see, and it's like this irrational fear because of the past training, so if you guys catch yourself in that training, in those patterns, recognize that came from the training, that came from as a child learning, the love me not thing, right? They love you when you're compliant, when you're fulfilling their expectations, and then they shut that love off immediately when you're not perfect according to their definition of perfect. But that's not the real world. That's not healthy adults. If you see that pattern in another adult, run. That's not another healthy adult. That's probably another narcissist or probably, someone on that spectrum, and don't hang out with people like that. If it's a little thing and they make it out to be this huge thing and it's early on in the dating, or early on in the friendship, that's your clue. Like get out now before you get in deeper. Someone says, yes, I feel like my house was a house of light and now it's a dungeon, and the cats feel it too. They're afraid of him. Yeah. You might, I don't know if you can do it. Cause again, you're walking on eggshells where you're at, but smudging sage, burning sage in an environment will clear out negative energy. You got to open the windows and the door, make sure everything is open so it goes out. But, blowing the sage, the smoke of it, and just clearing out and doing your own little like light ritual, to get rid of that stuff. Maybe when he's out or when she's out, if there's like a particular time of day and they might complain about the smell when they smell it later, maybe you can leave the windows open long enough that the smell gets out too and they don't even know. But you'll see that will make a big difference too. Someone says, all right, I think every opinion is threatening to their ego. Like, ooh, you have this opinion on your own, let me destroy it. Especially if they're learning something they didn't know. How dare you know better? You're wrong, that's the attitude. Yeah. And then she said to that other person, the cats feel it too in my experience. That's so true. Someone else says, or that person says, the cats are always upset and nervous and exhausted. Yeah, animals can really tap into this. I I noticed that my dog doesn't have a notably adversive reaction to them, but she becomes like extremely, what's the word? Like bonkers, really. Like she just goes nuts, like just absolutely nuts. And maybe it's just like, that's like the nervousness of the energy. And like, she has some anxiety, probably because she learned that from me. And so like when she's around somebody and she feels anxious, maybe that's just how, she becomes around that kind of energy. She's also fierce, like she wouldn't run. She's not like the kind of dog that would run away unless someone like actually had a physical object that they were trying to hit her with. But in terms of just their energy, she's fierce. And, I think maybe that's just how I've learned to notice it. Like when she starts going nuts and she's like biting at them, like, dogs can do that in a playful way, but she knows not to bite at people. But when she's just going so bonkers and biting at people, that's my warning sign from her. Maybe you see it in your cats in a very different way, but animals are definitely sensitive, especially to emotion and energy. I don't think they have the ability to think. I think they have the ability to feel, which is why their mind doesn't get in the way of their intuition. Like when they know they want something or they feel something, they just go do it, and they don't doubt themselves. Like the human, we have this amazing power of the conscious mind and the intellect, and it can do so many wonderful things. But at the same time, it's also like what can destroy us, what can hold us down through rationalization, through doubt, right? Through, obsession and worrying and rumination about things. Those are the downfalls. Those are the pitfalls that we have to watch out with. Let's see. Any other questions you guys have? I think I'm caught up. Okay, you'll have some for next time. No worries. That's great. All right, well, I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up then for tonight. Thank you so much to all of you who are attending and asking questions and sharing pieces of your story. And thank you to those of you who are listening to this later. I'm sending you all a big hug. Oh, sorry, there's one thing here. Someone says, I can't wait to reach escape velocity. I really feel like I have had such a bad judgment of character, but throughout these studies, if I make it, I'm going to be much better in the future. Good, because you're learning now. You're learning that discernment of character. You're learning the boundaries, and you're going to get to that escape velocity and get out of there. I have confidence in you. All right, sending you all a big hug and a lot of love to all of you. I'll see you next week.